I'm Fran Lynch, a deaconess in the United Methodist Church, served as a General Board of Global Missions missionary for 20 years in Willow, Alaska. Got to retire and get to live in Alaska, in Willow, as an old retired person. Still a deaconess. Sometimes we have stereotypes of people who live in Alaska as being always living out in the woods, wild and rugged. But Alaska is made up of cities and small communities and villages, and yeah, some of us live out in the woods. But we have houses, we have electricities, we have cell phones, we have TVs, and you create your own environment of how isolated or rural you are. Alaska is made up of all kinds of people. Yes, we have native Alaskans, Indians and Eskimos, but there's a lot of white folks. There's a lot of Pacific Islanders here in Alaska. Not too many Hispanic, but so there's a big cultural diversity in Alaska. And within the Alaska Missionary Conference, there's diversity. Most of our churches are predominantly made up of white folks. But we've got a couple that serve a lot of Native Americans, and like the church here in Willow, we've got two families that are Alaska natives. We're not all the same. We're real different. Many of us came up here for adventure, came for jobs with the oil company, with tourism, with fishing, hunting, and we came and we stayed. Big military presence. So many military personnel came and served and either stayed when they got out of the military or came back because this became home and where they wanted to live. So that's a strong influence on our state and on our churches. It can be all over the board in Alaska about how we view our resources. Yes, we get the permanent fund dividend, which is from oil revenues, and we appreciate that. Some folks feel like they've earned it, they deserve it. I mean, it's Alaska oil, so thus we need part of that. Others, it's like, I didn't do anything to get this. For some folks, it's the makes or break whether they can live in any kind of comfort level. When it buys the winter gear for the children who've grown a year since you got the last check, and you know you've got snow boots and snow pants, then it's important. Some folks build their houses with that dividend check. So in a sense, the oil is ours, but a chunk of our land is owned by the federal government. And it's the federal government that gives us tons of money to have infrastructure, to have roads and bridges, telephone systems, all those things. So it's a back and forth process with that. Many people live here, and I for one, because I appreciate the natural resources, the beauty, the trees, the rivers, the animals, and there's a sense of wanting to take care of it. Wanting to share it, because if I can see Denali Mountain and I'm in awe, and I've seen it every day for 20 years, I can understand when someone sees it for the first time, the tourist that comes through. But I want to live in awe of that mountain and its beauty and appreciate it. In Alaska, in my mind, and living in Willow, it's hard to find, here's the pocket of the people who are wealthy and don't have financial problems, and here's the pocket of the people who are living in poverty. We're very much interwoven. On the same road, you can go from what would be substandard housing to what would be a mansion. And we're pretty well interwoven together. Some of the newer homeowners in Alaska may have the nicer, bigger houses. So some of those houses that are substandard, that families live there forever and ever and ever. And so they're holding the history. They're the backbone of the Willow community because they've been here for so long. For me to live in that kind of mix all around me gives me a better view of reality of the world, because I can't live in an isolated pocket of wealth or poverty, either one, and have a realistic view. And it means then, in terms of ministry in our churches, we've got in the pews all kinds of people worshiping together. It means that in Willow here with the food pantry, we've got volunteers at the pantry who are also recipients of food at the pantry. And that's important. That gives us a grounding. That gives us a solid base that we can stand on together. And I think that's true in many of our Alaska churches. You've got a real mix of income levels all together. And you've got some long-timers in Alaska, and you've got your new folks. And getting us all to cooperate can be interesting at times. Yeah. Folks come to Alaska for all kinds of reasons. Some are searching. It's not uncommon for folks who are coming who are escaping from something. Used to be an alcoholic or a drug addict, and they're trying to stay clean and sober, and they need a different setting, and we've got this allure of the last frontier. You can live in the woods. You can take care of yourself. You don't have to interact with people. And some folks make it and some don't. So much of it depends on how you manage the resources you have. And a lot of it depends on how you're willing to cooperate with others. Isolation's hard. You can live in a large city and be isolated because you don't interact with other people. You can live out in the rural areas of Alaska and be isolated because your nearest neighbor is a couple of miles away. But your neighbor may not be that far away, and you got to pay attention to each other. And if you notice that there's no smoke coming out at the cabin down the road and it's 20 below, you don't ignore that. You got to pay attention. And it may be that you've had conflict with that person, but you're not going to let them freeze to death. So folks come looking, but they have to be willing to take help. And the help could be from a church, could be from a friend, could be from the food pantry. It could be going to, like in a small town where everybody gathers at Ronnie's Deli or the post office, and you see people and you interact with people. The school systems are great in your small communities to figure out what kids are struggling and why is there a struggle, what's going on at home, and then trying to find resources to help mom, because mom's home at home all day by herself, or because somebody's sick and they're not getting the medical care they need, or there's just a lack of food. And you just need food for the kid to take home on the weekend, so there's something for them to eat. Some folks come because they've been here before. They came as a tourist, and they fell in love with the place, and they're on vacation. And so they come back to live, and they're not on vacation anymore. And they got to find a job, and they got to figure out the transportation on how to get to that job. They got to figure out how to get training. And if you live 75 miles from Anchorage, but you got to go there to get training for a job, and you don't have good transportation, it's very difficult. So it's different from being a tourist from living here. So a lot of our young people leave. You know, we've got some colleges here in the state, but many times they want to go to college outside, meaning not in Alaska. The degree programs are different or better or whatever, and they don't want to come back home. They want to stay outside, and thus there's that kind of drain. And then you've got our young adults who are coming here because it's an adventure. They want to be a kayaking guide or a fishing guide or a dog musher. And so it's constant in and out with that. As a deaconess for the United Methodist Church, that's my relationship to the church. So it really doesn't matter what job I have. I'm always a deaconess. And so what brought me to Alaska was a desire to live here that started in high school, but was the job, which was as a missionary, a church community worker for the General Board of Global Ministries here in the Willow Church and in some Native Indian villages. So applied for that job and got it, got approval from the Deaconess Program Office that would be an appropriate appointment. And so got to come up here, and it was a dream come true. Everything fell into place, and this is home, very much home for me. So as a church community worker, I basically helped the Willow United Methodist Church how to address the needs in the Willow community. We're on the road system, a couple of thousand people, not a lot of jobs, a lot of poverty, some folks really living isolated. And in working with the church, it was a matter of people needed food, people needed transportation, they needed help paying their electric bill, they needed somebody to listen to them. The school needed somebody to go to somebody's house, because if you call like social services because there's an issue, the trooper's going to show up. And if you get a response, so if you called me, the church lady could go, and it was a different atmosphere and a different reaction and a different openness to getting help. And so it was, but the Willow United Methodist Church is small, and we can't and we don't need to do this alone. So it was partnering with the Baptist Church and the Roman Catholic Church and with the school system and the Willow Lions Club and with the little deli in town or the post office, all these entities to work together, we can address needs, building those coalitions. And that, over the years, has made the ministry stronger. It's not just the Willow United Methodist Church, and everything doesn't come from support of from the connection of the United Methodist Church. We've got other churches in the Willow community who make regular financial donations and donations of their members as volunteers in the ministry. And thus, it's not just a United Methodist ministry, it's our ministry as our community ministry. That was vitally important when I retired, because another missionary was not sent to take my place. And so the Willow United Methodist Church and the Willow community had to figure out, do we still need this ministry? And we do, but how do we do it without a missionary, without that resource? And so having to pool our money, pool our grant writing, pool our use of the building, and then finding a person locally. And it was scary not to have a missionary to replace me, but we created a job for a local person instead of a job for an outside person. And thus we've got a woman who's making a living managing that program now. So it's very, in my mind, for me, the epitome, or not the epitome, the ultimate in church and community ministry. One little church that doesn't stand alone, but becomes the community church, which pulls us together to create programs, opportunities, address needs. Today at the deli, the woman who never darkens our church door. I hear everybody likes your new ministers. Yeah, she knows us. We've had a minister leave, and I had a woman who's with the Roman Catholic Church, and her statement was, well, who are they going to send us? Because she's a part of the community, thus she's a part of our ministry and that part of it. So when the churches came to Alaska, not just Methodist, but other denominations, they came because we were a mission field. It was a new frontier, and there were people here, and the churches followed. So, and we saw the need, and so many times we as missionaries tried to address the needs of the native Alaskans, particularly with children, with the mission schools. But we took them out of their villages, or we sent missionaries to the villages and said, you can't dance your dances, you can't wear your mask, you can't speak your languages. And we did a lot of damage. And it's interesting that I have found in doing some reading about the whole idea of manifest destiny in the U.S., and we have this right to conquer, to create, to make it part of our country. And to do that, we have to eliminate the people or control them, but then we also want to make them Christians. And those go hand in hand, and how do we balance that? And we haven't balanced it very well in many times. In Alaska, in my time here for the past 21 years, was when we came to the understanding about the negative understanding with many Native Alaskans about the word missionary. And it brought on the hostility, the anger, the sadness, the fear of what they were mainly, the Native Alaskans were told they could not do if they were Christian for the missionaries. And so we had to make a conscious decision that we don't call ourselves the Alaska Missionary Conference. We're the Alaska Conference of the United Methodist Church, a missionary conference. So we don't lose that understanding of who we are, but we have to be careful with our words. The word missionary brings up all kinds of images. For the Alaska Natives, it also brings up all kinds of images for non-Alaskans. Missionaries, they go off to Africa. You go someplace different, but we've got missionaries here in Alaska that are from Alaska, that are from the lower 48. And that's a different understanding of missionary that many of us have in our churches, not just outside, but also here in Alaska, for sure. The churches have to address the needs of the people in which they're located. And you got all kinds of people. The whites, the natives, the Pacific Islanders, the new ones, the old ones. And so you have to take people where they are. And if where someone is a negative attitude toward the church because of some past experience, so that's where you start. And you almost have to reintroduce a different kind of church, a different kind of understanding, a different relationship with church or the church lady or the church people. To begin to build relationship. So you can then talk about needs, you can talk about faith, you can talk about God, and you get to live your faith with that. So it's just not words. Alaska is wide open, and that's good and bad. We're wide open in that with our United Methodist churches, we're spread out over thousands of miles and long distances with very little in between. That's an issue or a reality for us, is a term I use more than issue, is the whole idea of isolation and of transportation. Our minister in Nome doesn't have a neighboring United Methodist minister to relate to. In Alaska, out in Ketchikan or Sitka. So the reality is we have ministers who are in isolated situations. Whenever we want to gather as a conference, we have to have bunches of money to bring people together. We mainly come to Anchorage because that's the center for us. And it's cheaper transportation to get everybody to Anchorage than it is to Seward or to Juneau. So that's the reality, is it takes a lot of money and time. If you want someone to come to Anchorage for a meeting and you got to add on a couple of days just to fly there, you're asking them to be away from home, to be away from the church or their job if it's a layperson or their family. So that's a reality we have to deal with. And yet we have to gather at times. We need face-to-face contact. You can do a lot of video conferencing, but face-to-face is different. You can't lay your hands on somebody and pray in a video conference. And in my mind have the same meaning with that. So our distance, our transportation, we're small churches predominantly. And as small churches all across the United States, we struggle with how are we vital? How do we stay alive? How do we pay our preacher and the light bill? Our ministers in this conference come from outside, which means they're coming from other annual conferences. And so our bishops have to figure out how that works for there. We're asking many of our ministers to come a long way, and we want to stay. We want them to stay for a long period of time. It's expensive to move them here. And you get them trained in knowledge, and then they leave, and they go back home for whatever reasons, very valid reasons. But then we lose that resource. We lose that history. That transition can be hard. And you got to find the right minister for the right church. And so several of our churches now have part-time ministers instead of full-time ministers. And that's a different recruiting method is needed. How many people can survive on a part-time job, particularly with a family? It also means, though, some of our ministers have been ministers for a long time and they're retired. And so we get some great experienced clergy in some of our little churches. I think we've got, in terms of what's going for us, is we're a conference that is growing in an understanding of how we not only receive mission work, but we provide mission work. So many of our churches are doing local ministries in their communities. They're reaching out with assistance in some kind, whether it's AA, help with alcoholism, or a food pantry, or a shelter to be in for homeless folks. And so those little ministries put our little mission churches in ministries to their community. We've got churches who are sending volunteer mission teams out all across the country, and we can do that. So we have to survive, we have to receive mission and we have to give mission. And that can happen in United Methodism because of the connection. Because we know we are a global church. And only in realizing that and accepting that and seeing how we're connected all around can mission thrive with that. Several of our churches have United Methodist Women groups, and then we've got our conference group. It's like in so many places we struggle to get enough young adults involved in that. But we have our annual meeting and our spiritual growth studies and the Mission U studies. We gather in pockets for different things. Predominantly older women are there. For example, in the Willow United Methodist Church, we figured out how to have United Methodist women when we agreed we're going to meet 3 times a year, and that's it. Because we can gather 3 times a year. And we do a lesson out of the program book. We always do the World Thank Offering. And that actually has become a church-wide event for us. And we make our pledge to mission, and we're United Methodist women, and that works for us. United Methodist Women, of course, do so much with their funding for mission agencies all over. So within the United Methodist Women Alaska, they're funding local projects within their own communities, with Nome, in Alaska, Willow, as well as the outreach that United Methodist Women do beyond your own boundaries. United Methodist Women have, I think in Alaska, have figured out how deaconesses fit in. I was their token deaconess for a long time. We now have another deaconess and a candidate for deaconess, and we're invited to do things for and with United Methodist Women because we're deaconess. And there's that growing understanding of how we connect, how we support each other. I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about this interview, so I had no expectations.
And that's good.